Hello YouTube, Mandibil here. I am going to comment on a Stefan Molyneux video about truth and value as far as I understand, but it's called True, but compared to what? Question mark. So, as truth is a cornerstone of philosophy, I am going to take a stab at commenting on what he's saying. And I warn you that it may be a long-winding thing. That I heard the first 5 or 7 minutes or so, and I thought I'm not sure what he's talking about. And so I'm doing my best to try to make sense of it. And it seems to be it's a cutout from a longer conversation about computer programming. So which does not make it easier to get a grip on. So, but let's see how it goes.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to try a little new thing tonight, which is, so I've been having the urge to go back to my roots of rock and roll, the blues, and to solo casts. But I got to tell you, solo casts sometimes feel a bit isolated, bit bubble-y, as in I'm in a bubble. And so I wanted to try doing, I guess, a new way of running this stuff, which is to do a stream to our good friends, our supporters, our philosophy of the show, put forward a thesis and have it disassembled by the expert bulk brain of the listeners and the supporters. So that
I'll do my best for sure. I know you wouldn't be considering me a listener or a good philosopher because I disagree with basically every core philosophy you have, but nevertheless, in a free market, in a free world, I can do this. So
that's what we're going to take a swing at. Tonight, there were two topics, pretty fundamental topics to philosophy that were floating around on the board. And one of them was the question of value. What is value? And of course, the other was the question of truth. So I want to do the truth thing first, get some feedback, and then tell you what I think about the term or the word value. Now, the truth thing, I talk about it in Essential Philosophy. You can get for free at essentialphilosophy.com. I talk about it in On Truth, The Tyranny of Illusion, my first book, but
I might want to look that up and see what he says there, and maybe make the truth about Stefan Molyneux truth in a later video. There seems to be, compare all his different truth and see if it makes any sense at all.
It's one of these topics that it never hurts to revisit at all.
I would certainly agree.
So let's start off with the topic of truth. And it's a big topic. It's really the foundational.
So why do we need to frame it? It's a big topic. It's foundational. So the first thing you do, but let's talk about it. Then you talk about it as a concept or an idea or the place in the world. And instead of digging into the real stuff, why not get to the point? Why do you need to sort of put off this word salad smokescreen, which is a recurring thing when you discuss, is it to make it way longer than it has so you can create some sort of video or podcast out of it, instead of just saying this. And maybe a reason why you wouldn't want to do this, come and get me right, is that it's too specific. It's too easy for other people to tear it down. But if you stretch it out over, 20 minutes of ramblings, it's hard to attack it. But that means it leaves a sense of doubt about what you're talking about. And then most, insecure people will say, well, of course he's right because he has, he's bald, so he must be right?
Of philosophy, which is what is true. And with all aspects of philosophy, we must always ask, first and foremost, compared to what? We say.
Compared to what? No, you don't start a discussion about gravity by saying we have to compare gravity to something. It's so unbelievably, ridiculously bad philosophy, right? You don't start a discussion about a horse by saying, well, we have to compare it to something. Why? You don't have to compare it to something. You're Mr. Objective guy, right? It's not relative. It's not a discussion about relative stuff, right? Because if you need to compare things, you need to establish objectivity, or at least some object. You may not need objectivity. That's a step too far, an unnecessary far step. But to compare things, you need to know things. You can't compare things you don't know yet, right? So to establish that knowledge, you need truth. Do you have any idea how stupid what you're saying is? Do you know? Do you have any grasp how ridiculous your statements are?
This statement is true. Okay, well, compared to what? Well, compare.
Truth is not something you compare. Either if I experience elephant, I can make the proposition that is an elephant. That can be true to me, or it can be false to me, right? There may be a gray area, let's say, that is, I don't know, I'm not actually sure whether or not. I would be open to discussing that. But you're not comparing your experience to something else, because you only have that freaking experience, right? You experience an elephant, you make a proposition, you say, that's an elephant. That is true to me because I'm the one having the experience. You can't know if anybody else in your surroundings has that experience, exactly because of the problem of other minds. You might want to look that up.
Something that's not true, or, and this is a big category that I wanted to talk about tonight with you guys, thoughts and feedback on it.
I'll give you feedback.
Other category is there's true, false, and unverifiable. True.
Well, okay. So true, false, and unverifiable. But you started to talk about comparisons, and now you're starting to say, yeah, but apart from truth, there's also false and unverifiable. But you're only talking about true, right? So you shouldn't be talking about false. Or is that implicit in the talk about true that you also need to talk about false, right?
True, false, and unverifiable. And everybody thinks it's like this bichromatic rainbow of true and false. But I'm going to argue that we also do want to talk about the issue of what is unverifiable. So a true statement, right? A true statement. Let's take it as a simple example. True statement, an elephant is a mammal.
No, you can't have a statement that is intrinsically true. It's impossible. There are no statements that are intrinsically true. It's always a comparison between your experience and a proposition. There are no statements that are absolutely true. Why would you want to make the statement then if it was the case, right? You don't need to make the statement if it's intrinsically true. You would just go about your truthiness, right? And not want to make a statement about it.
All right. Has hair, is warm-blooded, gives birth to live young, that kind of stuff, right? So an elephant is a mammal, okay?
No, an elephant is not a mammal. Now we are talking about objectivity, right? Now we are talking about what can be true. You can't see any mammalness on an elephant. You need to understand this. You really need to understand this. Otherwise, you're sort of an imposter on both science and philosophy, right? Mammal is not true. It's an artificial mental construct human beings use to categorize stuff, right? In this case, animals. Somebody wrote somewhere that an animal that does this and does that and has this color and these number of legs or whatever it is I will call that a mammal, right? That doesn't mean that mammalness all of a sudden is sort of a part of the elephant, right? You can't experience mammalness. You can experience whatever is the part of that experience or the impression of that elephant, and then compare it to some standard called mammal, and say it conforms to this standard called mammal. But conforming to a standard is not truth, because truth needs to be an object, right? In my opinion, I will only attach truth to something that can be objective, and that is an object, right? There can be subjective things in your experience, like hunger. You could choose to say that that can also be a true experience. You can either not be hungry or you can be hungry. But I don't like these kind of matters of degree. So I would prefer call it something else. I would specifically only attach true and false and whatever is needed to things that can potentially become an objective.
Okay, that's a statement that can be verified. It's true.
It can be verified according to a standard called mammal, but it can't be true.
Now, a false statement is
There are no intrinsically false statements either. I must stress that if there's no intrinsically true statement, there are no intrinsically false statement.
I was an elephant last night. I, being Steph, or a human being, say, I was an elephant last night. Well, what's interesting is that because it is a contradictory phenomenon, in other words, I'm sort of breaking the law of identity by saying, I am myself a human being, but last night I was an elephant. That's impossible. It's not possible. And therefore, it is false and does not need to be verified. In other words, we don't need to say, well, I'm going to need some footage.
Well, it's actually the structure of your argument is invalid, because it's not something that can be considered true. So you're making a proposition that is internally invalid. You are referring to something I can't check, right? So it's not something that can be true, right? So no matter what your answer might be, it has nothing to do with a proposition. One of the cornerstones of being a proposition is it must refer to something in the now, because in the now is the only point actually that you can experience, but it's also the only point sort of in time, let's say, where you have sense data. And sense data is needed to experience stuff. If you don't have any sense data, you're not going to experience an elephant, not an impression of an elephant, right? The idea of an elephant is not something that is true, right? Because it's particularly to your imagination. So your question, your proposition, or what you call that statement is not a proposition. It is a statement. Yeah, sure. Let's call it a statement, but it's not a proposition. That's a certain kind of statements that can be, based on sense data in the now. So when your statement refers to something that is either in the past or in the future, it is not a proposition.
Of you last night to find out if you were, in fact, an elephant or not, right? So that's false by definition. The first one is true by definition.
No, it's not false. It doesn't have falsity or trueness to it. It's not a proposition. So you shouldn't attach true or false to it.
Definition in that mammal is a synonym for the characteristics that an elephant has. Now, the other category is potentially true, but unverifiable. So first statement, an elephant is a mammal. Second statement, I was an elephant last night. Third statement, I had a dream about.
Well, it's not. It can't be true because I had a dream. I had a dream. It almost feel like I'm going into an ABBA song, but no, I'll spare you. It's not something you're referring to something in the past, so it can't be a proposition. Even it's under the pretense of being a proposition, it should be rejected as a statement which is not a proposition. So it's very simple.
An elephant last night. I had a dream about an elephant last night. Now,
who gives a shit about your elephant dreams, right? Who knows? Who cares?
Is that possible? Sure. Is it verifiable? Well, even if we had some magical means or some high-tech means appearing within people's dreams, it would not be verifiable.
No, the only one who can have any kind of verification on that is you having the memory of having that dream, because all you have now is the memory of having the dream, or the dream, let's say, right? So you're the only one who have any line of thought that could be called a verification, but you're the only one having that, right? And since you're the only one having it, it doesn't make any sense to call it true, because true is something you want to communicate to somebody else. You're not communicating to yourself that you are experiencing an elephant. Oh, that's true, that elephant. Oh, it's true, there's a phone. Oh, it's true, there's a cup. Oh, it's true, there's a, my glasses box. Oh, it's true that there's a wire here, and so on, right? You don't go around saying that. You just experience it. The reason you need to establish truth is to communicate it with somebody else. But then you run into the problem of lying, but that's another question. So I don't think that's a part of this story here, right?
Because I wasn't hooked up to it last night. So when I say, you say, oh, well, you're going to put you up to a sort of lie detector and so on, as in my daughter playing Among Us, but they're not particularly reliable. And voice stress analyzers are basically rolling the dice. So I say, I had a dream about an elephant last night. It is potentially true, but it is unverifiable. So we can't say...
Yeah, but what do you mean it's unverifiable? There are two categories of people here, you can say. There's the bald guy, unbearded bald guy from North America, who claim to have had the dream. And then there's those people outside your mind who never had that dream. Maybe they had the similar kind of dream in the past or something, or last night also. But let's say that nobody had that dream that in your surroundings you are arguing with. Then there's you who had the dream, and then those outside who didn't have the dream. Right? So I have to go back a few seconds here. Let's hear it again.
Reliable. And voice stress analyzers are basically rolling the dice. So I say, I had a dream about an elephant last night. It is potentially true, but it is unverifiable. So we can't say that it's true in the same way that we say the Earth is a sphere, or...
But now you're saying we. There's a difference between that individual who had the dream, or those individuals you are telling you had a dream. You can't lump them all into the same box and say now they are all going to find out what is true, right? First of all, it's no longer true because it's not a proposition, but you have a memory of the dream. Fine, stay with that memory, analyze it all you want. Maybe the elephant means that your mother was a big fat bitch or something, like, who knows? Analyze it all they want. But those who didn't have the dream has no connection to that experience, so they cannot possibly be true in any way you could possibly want to claim that true, because they never had anything remotely that could call an experience of that you are claiming could be true, right?
Or elephants or mammals and so on. But it's also not false by definition because it's not impossible.
But
so
it's not
the
impossible.
Interesting question.
No, but but that's hypothetical, that it's not impossible that you had a dream. I can't rule out that you didn't have a dream. or that you had a dream. I don't care about your dreams, right? Why are you going into dreamland to talk about things that can be true? You don't establish all these things. This can't be true. I'm going to talk about truth. Okay, now I'm talking about everything that can't be true. I'm going to my dream can't be true, or this can't be true, or this can't be true. State your definition if you want to, if you dare to make a definition of truth. Start with that so we understand where you're going, but you're walking around over here saying this can't be true over here, and this is hard to say, this can't be verified, and this is all sorts of things, because you are so afraid of stepping into the arena and saying, I am going to present a definition of truth, because you can't. You don't have the balls. You don't have the cojones to make a definition of truth. And I mean, I would probably feel the same if I had your mind, because judging from the truth you presented in UPB, it's like, I mean, it's like reading a 800-page book to understand what truth is, right? It's equally easy to understand, meaning it's impossible to understand.
To me is, and I want to get you guys' thoughts right at the beginning here. The interesting question to me is, how much of your day, I mean, if we just broadly look at these three categories, right? True, false by definition.
There's nothing that is false by definition. There's nothing that is false by definition. It's not a definition. It's a result of a comparison between your experience and a proposition. Either the proposition and your experience conform to each other, that you're experiencing that elephant that is mentioned in the proposition, and supply that the proposition is correct and don't have any internal flaws, then that proposition is true to you. Or if there's no elephant, the proposition is false to you. Right? That's how it works. What are you talking about?
And unverifiable. How much of your day is spent in each category? And it's a real rule. I was sort of thinking about this myself. It's kind of a rule of thumb thing. You can't.
But there's no extension in time about truth or false. There's no extension in time. I'm not spending time in truth or spending time in false. Are you absolutely freaking out of your mind? What's the matter with you? What the hell are you talking about? This is the ramblings of a crazy person.
I get down to exact percentages or anything like that, but what part of your day, how much of your day is spent on unverifiable stuff, or stuff that's hard to verify? And certainly if you're involved in politics, if you do science, then...
Okay, you spent 4 or 5 years in politics, or doing part-time politics, supporting Trump. So I'm interested in understanding how you categorize that.
And hopefully you're in the former. If you are a psychic, you're almost completely in the last category of unverifiable. I mean, it's not impossible for there to be some extrasensory perception, although it's pretty hard to sort of figure it out in the realm of physics. It's not impossible by definition. It's not entirely self-contradictory, but it remains in the I had a dream about an elephant last night level of unverifiability. Actually,
no, but you can verify your dream if you're the one having the dream. You can verify it to the extent that you have a memory of that dream. I mean, it's possible that you have a memory of something that didn't really occur. I can rule out, and that's why memories or something are not good measures of anything, right? That's why things need to be in the now in order to be knowledge. Things that are in the past or in the future cannot possibly be knowledge, right?
It's even further down the category of unverifiability, because you could have a dream about an elephant last night, but nobody's ever proved psychic or extrasensory perception phenomenon. So the job of philosophy is to say, okay, well, what is truth? Well, truth is the relationship between what is in your mind, the formulations that you have in your mind that are claimed to be universal.
I need to write this down. I need to write this down exactly as he says it. I'm winding back a bit. So, this is a deeply philosophical dissection of a important philosophical discussion. So bear with me, please.
Verifiability, because you could have a dream about an elephant last night, but nobody's ever proved psychic or extrasensory perception phenomenon. So the job of philosophy is to say, okay, well, what is truth? Well, truth is the relationship between...
I might add it before we dig deeply in. The philosophy is first and foremost to enlighten yourself and others maybe about why do you need truth? What is truth in itself, right? Why are there such a idea as truth? Why do we need that? What is its sort of purpose, right? And then you can define what it does, and it does this and does that, right? But I could invent some new Babili-Bab, and then I could define what Babili-Bab does. But it would be nice if I state first why I invented this term and idea called Babili-Bab, right? Before I start to describe this is how you use it and this is what it does and so on. Maybe there's some implicit understanding in that definition afterwards of what it does, that means, okay, so this is the purpose of it. I understand that. But from a strictly philosophical point of view, it would be a good idea, sort of a meta understanding of what truth is.
What is in your mind?
Sorry, I have to wind back a bit again.
Definition, it's not entirely self-contradictory, but it remains in the I had a dream about an elephant last night level of unverifiability. Actually, it's even further down the category of unverifiability, because you could have a dream about an elephant last night, but nobody's ever proved psychic or extrasensory perception phenomenon. So the job of philosophy is to say, okay, well, what is truth? Well, truth is the relationship between...
Truth is the relationship between
what is in your mind,
what is in your mind,
formulations that you have in your mind, that
the formulations, so that's the what is, the formulations that you have in your mind,
that are claimed to be universal.
That are claimed that are claimed to be universal.
Truth and subjectivity.
Truth. Are we now jumping out of the definition? Truth and subjectivity
have a very interesting relationship.
Have a very interesting relationship. That interesting is a subjective term, right? So you're using a subjective term to describe a comparison between truth and subjectivity. Interesting.
I say I like Adele as
If I say I like Adele, that's a singer, I believe.
the singer,
Yeah.
is that a true statement?
Is that a true statement? Is that a true statement? I'm not sure if he's done with his definition. I suppose he is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I play music a lot and so on, and I'm not a masochist, although some would say that the two would be in similar categories.
Now, I need to maybe attach a few comments to that sort of that relational idea of truth, which I just rejected a few minutes ago, right? Okay, he says truth is, and that must be a definition, right? The relationship between what is, which is the formulations in your mind. Yeah, I'm truncating it so it doesn't become too convoluted. The relationship between the formulations in your mind that are claimed to be universal. The relationship between the formulations in your mind that are claimed to be universal. But if I experience an elephant and I want to establish whether or not that is true, is that a claim in my mind about that elephant? Does the elephant claim something in my mind, or am I another part of my mind claiming there's an elephant, or what? I don't know if I should be experiencing that elephant, right? So you can say that the elephant in some way is claiming itself on me. I didn't choose to experience elephant. I don't know if I should be experiencing elephant, right? Otherwise, a claim of something is to jump into an infinite regression backwards in time, right? Because that claim is based on what? Another claim, which is based on another claim, which is based on another claim. You can't go into that infinite regression because you will never arrive at any understanding what knowledge is. There can't be knowledge about what knowledge is because it's a circular argument. How do you know it's knowledge? I just know it. But how did you get that knowledge? Well, I just know it. But then you can say to yourself from here to eternity or backwards that you know it because you know it, because you know it, because you know it, because you know it. Don't you understand there's an infinite regression in saying there's a claim of knowledge, right? So what you're trying to say is, I have knowledge of elephant, and now I have a specific elephant, and now I'm trying to compare that specific elephant with an elephant in my mind. Is that the relationship you was talking about? At formulations, is one formulation is the idea of the elephant, the other is the experience of the elephant, and now I'm making that relationship thing, and I can, in that case, I can say if it's true or false, that elephant. But then you are equating your experience with your mental idea of an elephant as equals and establishing truth. That's not how it works, because that's the same as saying you have foreknowledge of elephant. You do not have that. As much as you want that, you do not have that, because that would be the same as saying that you knew that that elephant was supposed to be there. Well, you don't, right? You have no way of checking whether or not that experience is supposed to be there. Okay.
It's a somewhat verifiable statement, but it's relatively unimportant. In terms of philosophy, it might be interesting in terms of marketing. If you want to sell Adele albums, you might figure out who likes her the most and market to them, and the sort of algorithms of who you market to, who you sell to. It's important and interesting stuff from an economic standpoint, but not necessarily from a philosophical standpoint. Personal subjective tastes and preferences and opinions and so on They have a truth, but that truth is not universal.
Come on, man, stay with your own question. If I say I like Adele, is that a true statement? Stick to it. Just don't throw all this smoke out to confuse your listeners, right? Stay with the focus. Stay focused, right? Concentrate, Luke. If I say I like Adele, is that a true statement? If, let's say I like Adele. If I mean I like the music, well, let's say I like the music when I say I like Adele, or the music that is supposed to be Adele's. You could go into a discussion. How do I know it's Adele? How do I know it's music by Adele? How do I know all these things? Let's just say that what is called Adele is what I like, right? It's a matter, it actually, as I pointed out earlier, it's a matter of definition. How far down the line of experiences are you willing to go with truth or false, right? What can you make a proposition about? I mean, I'm open for the possibility to say that feeling hungry or liking music can be true or false. But what I don't like about it is a matter of degree, right? You don't like all the sounds that are attached to Adele equally. Some of it you like more, some of it you like less. Queen have made great music, and they've also made some awful music. When I say I like Queen, do I, there's a track by Queen called Fun It, which is god awful, a Roger Taylor track. And there are other, I can't think of, there's a few others on later albums that are disgustingly bad. One I particularly hate is Cool Cat. But I like, the March of the Black Queen. Does that mean that I like Queen? But what does it mean, right? It's something that is so hard to make a proposition about that is useful in any way. But the point is, if you want to make that statement and you want to say it's true, it can only be you that is true to or false to. So it doesn't matter in a larger scheme of things. Well, you can discuss all you want what you like with other people. And if they trust that you like Adele, it might inspire them to go and listen to Adele, or it might inspire them to go to listen to Queen or whatever it is, right? That's fine. Why do you need to attach truth to it, right? Truth is a very important thing that is needed to establish objectivity, which is important because it's needed to establish a moral principle, in my opinion. You can't do it without it, because otherwise people won't agree on what they're talking about, right? So who gives a shit about Adele or Queen in this regard?
That truth is not universal. If I say I like Adele, I'm not claiming a universal statement. Now, if I say I like Adele because she's a great singer, okay, well, then there's some ways to measure the quality of a singer, the range, the tone, the pitch, perfection of the singing, and so on. There's ways to sort of figure that stuff out. But then there are people, Bob Dylan and so on, not great singers, but...
Are you turning a subjective judgment into an objective standard? Why don't you have a caveat that's saying, what I'm saying now is my subjective opinion about this, right? Now what are you doing? You're talking about some sort of objective standard about singers.
She's a great singer. Okay, well, then there's some ways to measure the quality of a singer, the range, the tone.
No. You're not listening to the range or the tone, maybe from some sort of, excuse me. Oh, I got the COVID. Just kidding. It's not, you can't, because what you are experiencing are not pitch and not mammal and not all these standards. These standardizations are not what you experience. You experience the qualias. the sound, the sound and the emotion you get from that sound. You don't experience the pitch or whatever it is you're referring to. These are, measuring standards, right? That's not what you experience. It isn't. That it's not what you like about it, at least, right? So, and this Bob Dylan is a bad singer or whatever. No, it's a subjective standard. Some people are just absolutely crazy about the way Bob Dylan sings, right? I actually like Bob Dylan, his earlier work, where his voice was more like, a cleaner, a more, youthful, and even his, Nashville Skyline, where he sounds like, a Strata singer or something like very, very, very high voice. And he excused it by he had quit smoking. I'm thinking that this is actually his real voice, and the other voice we are used to is something he changes his voice into to sound more rough, right? But that's just my opinion. His later works sounds like he's, it has become muddled and sort of indistinguishing, and the toning of his. I don't like that, but it's subjective. Maybe there are people who really like his later work, the way he sounds there. This is my opinion. Right? This is my opinion. I want to have my opinion about Bob Dylan, no matter what you think, right? I like it, but it's fine that you don't like Bob Dylan or whatever. I don't really care. But be careful not in a discussion about universality and objectivity and subjectivity, presenting your opinion as some kind of objectivity. People might mistake what you're saying, right? Get confused about it. So stay focused on what you're talking about.
The pitch, perfection of the singing and so on. There's ways to sort of figure that stuff out. But then there are people, Bob Dylan and so on, not great singers, but very popular songwriters and performers. So in the realm of truth, the subjective statements are really the realm of aesthetics or marketing or stuff like that, not really the realm of philosophy, because they're not claiming to make objective.
Now you're equating areas where you can't apply truth to be outside of philosophy? Why? Why is it forbidden to use philosophy on things that are purely subjective? In fact, all of your experience is subjective from the get-go. Everything is subjective. I don't give a shit about your fetish for objectiveness or objectivity. Everything is experienced by you, and you are a subject. Until you agree with somebody else about that experience, it's a subjective experience. You are a subject, one subject experiencing one object. That is, by definition, a subjective experience. If there's one more individual, you can make a proposition. That's why you need proposition, or you want propositions, because you want to communicate and establish objectivity with that person, so you can agree about what you're going to do together, right? So you establish or try to establish objectivity, but from the get-go, everything is subjective. Everything. Why don't you understand that? What's the matter with you?
Objective statements. I like Adele is no more really the province of philosophy than I like chocolate is the realm of philosophy. Subjective personal preferences, which make no objective or universal claims.
But if you are philosophizing about chocolate, I'm pretty certain about that. You're philosophizing in the sense that, well, I want a piece of chocolate, but I'm not going to eat 1 pound of chocolate. So that's a kind of philosophy. It would be bad for me. It would destroy. I would get a sugar rush, and I will get high, and then get low of an adrenaline kick in, and not adrenaline, insulin, and so on. That is philosophy. That is philosophy. You are philosophizing constantly. I would even claim that most of what you philosophize about is your subjective experience, because that is what you need to philosophize about in order to get to objectivity. You need to philosophize about your experience to establish objectivity. Before you have a clue about your subjective experience, you can't get to objectivity. That is why we are discussing objectivity, because we need to settle this thing called subjectivity and how to understand it, right?
Are not really the province of philosophy. Because when people talk about being philosophical, the way that I would certainly formulate the argument that I make is that they're saying that they have an objectively true statement to make about empirical reality. So, sorry, I know that I'd asked you guys, but I realize the categories are still a little blurred. So let me sort of comb them out a little bit more before I ask sort of what part of your life, how much of your life is spent in each particular realm. I'm not saying these are the only realms. I think these are the three major categories. But I don't spend much of my time in false by definition, because
nothing is false by definition. If you're saying it's false if I claim that a square circle exists, no, I'm just making nonsense. That you don't need to attach any true or falseness to that. You could say that it's false by definition or something like that, or by whatever you said. But you are babbling around in things that are nonsense. Now, why don't you get to the important part, how to get to objectivity, right? And if you say that I'm going out in the world and I'm going all on my own, experiencing objective stuff, then you are a freaking crazy person, right? Because you can't. It's a subjective experience. No matter if that part of that experience can later become some kind of objective understanding or reach objectivity with other persons. But it's from the get-go, from the start, it's subjective, right? Just because you experience something doesn't mean that somebody else is experiencing it, right? Because you have no way of checking it, right? You have to agree with them on it. And if you, at a big problem with your thinking is that you will say, well, I'm tapping into objectivity, and if you disagree with me, there's something wrong with you. You're out to get me. You're out to, whatever this and that and the other. If you are convinced that your experience is the case, right? That proposition is true, and somebody else says it's false, and they should be experiencing, for all you know, the same thing. Distance yourself from him, because then you're crazy, right? Possibly crazy. You don't want to, spend time with people who claim something to be false that should be obviously true, but you can't tell them they should be experiencing it, because you have no way of checking it, right?
That's what crazy people say. That's what insane people say. I was an elephant last night. And I just don't spend much time around crazy people, so.
Good. So, good. But you're rather crazy in your philosophy. So, I'm trying to, appeal to those people you are surrounded by and wake them up and make them think a bit about philosophy. But I have a sense that most of the people around you are not really that much into philosophy. They just want, secular and rational, right? And that's what they're interested in. They don't really care about, they haven't read your books, right? Really. But they want this, libertarian, anarchist philosopher who has solved the problem of the ages. They just trust it because it's better than having nothing, right?
That is, and even so, we had the conversation on Sunday about bannings and so on. And in a conversation I had with someone who'd left or had been banned or something like that, I said, well, you said this, and he said, no, I didn't. Now, normally that's kind of unverifiable. If you have a recording, of course, you can go back and play it, but usually can't interrupt the conversation in order to do so. So there is some verifiability. So if somebody says, you always do this, in some relation, you have a fight with your girlfriend. She says, well, you always do this. And then, of course, as a male, in the male brain, you look for the first exception. You say, well, I remember a time when I didn't do that. And then she gets frustrated because she says, well, okay, but you know what I meant, which is you generally or you mostly. And I say, well, that's not what you said. What you said is, I find one counterexample, you're proven false, and so on. So there's an example where somebody's making a universal statement. You think of one counterexample, and you've broken the universality of the statement, and then it becomes sort of a sliding scale. And this happens quite a lot, of course, in personal relationships. And in the realm of philosophy, what we're doing is we're saying, it's almost axiomatic, or you could say it's almost a tautology, that statements which claim that claim universality must pass the test of universality. Right? So statements which claim universality must pass the test.
But a statement is not about truth, right? A statement can be a proposition that then can be considered true. But a statement is not truth, right? You are mixing the concepts or the ideas of what we are talking about. It seems to me you don't even know what you're talking about. You don't understand how things work in these regards. It's unbelievable.
Of universality. If I say an elephant is a mammal, I've got a definition of a mammal,
Yeah, but the definition is not what you experience. You don't experience mammalness, right? Come on, man. You must be able to understand that. You can't push this garbage. But what are you doing? I mean, it's incredible.
The characteristics of an elephant, and I'm saying that they're universally true. And if you have an elephant that's not a mammal, then it's not an elephant. If you could imagine some bizarre lizard or amphibian that had all of the outward characteristics of an elephant, maybe we find it on some other.
No, but why would you be interested in talking about an elephant when you're not experiencing elephant? Well, that would be in a situation where you were interested in manipulating, right? And that's why it's extremely important that you trust your subjective judgment, because you need that to have any chance of figuring out whether or not somebody else is lying, right? You can't come with this mammal objectivity and say, this is how you find out on your own if it's an elephant or not, because you don't know if you should be experiencing that elephant. It's a subjective judgment whether or not you trust your experience. And the comparison of other people's conclusion about a proposition about that object. So you are sort of misleading people away from their subjective judgments. It is so important. It's the absolute most important thing you can do is to really study your subjective experience, because that is all you have.
The planet or something, but it is in fact cold-blooded. It doesn't have any hair in its body. I guess that would be one of the characteristics, but or it doesn't give birth to life young or something like that.
But unless that elephant is having some birth right now, well, how would I know? I mean, come on, man. I mean,
So we have a statement in the mind which claims to be mapped onto objective and universal.
We talk for you, speak for yourself. Speak about your own philosophy. Speak by your own experience. Don't say we. Don't tell me what's going on in my mind. You have no access to my mind, as I don't have any access to your mind. I'm trying to establish a way of thinking about these things that makes sense and is rigid and sort of aligns itself with how we function, right? I have nothing in my mind that claims that this should be an elephant, right? I experience the elephant. It's up to me to decide whether or not I trust it.
Reality, which we get through the senses, through the sense data. And If it passes the test of universality, then it is potentially true. If it doesn't pass...
No. It's only potentially true if it passes the test of universality. I mean, what? That's not what you do when you drive in your car. If something passes over the road, you are not going to sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to make the claim I have in my head is I'm going to analyze this, and this could potentially be universally true, and I have to. No, that's not how things work, right? You have to react. You have to take a chance, so to say, that what you experience is the case. Otherwise, you would be long dead.
As the test of universality, then it is not a truth statement that is related to philosophy. Then it's a personal preference statement. Somebody says, I like the color blue. Is that really the province of philosophy? No, it may be the province of fashion or interior decoration or something like that. It's not really the province of philosophy, I would say, at all. Philosophy concerns itself with the universals, and then in particular, philosophy concerns itself with moral universals, which we'll get to in a second when we talk about value. But yeah, just for those who are listening, do you spend a lot of time, and if there are other categories, throw them my way, but do you spend a lot of time in objective truths? Did the code compile? Will the bridge stay up? Did you make the sale? Something that's testable in objective reality. Do you spend a lot of time on things which are unverifiable? Do you spend a lot of time discarding things which are directly contradictory, self-contradictory, 2 and 2 makes 5 kind of stuff? When it comes, and I imagine this shows up in your jobs probably more.
Do you really need to?
It could show up in your personal life.
Do you really need to say that to your listeners? Are you asking your listeners whether or not they are that stupid or that weird? I mean, what are you saying to your listeners, that they're sort of crazy? What are you trying to say? Nobody spends time. Nobody, even if they say that they like 2 + 2 is 5, or that they're unicorns and whatever, it's their way of using language to manipulate, to get what they want. They do understand how things work, right? You're just so confused about this objectivity that has to be force-fed into any understanding of what is sort of philosophy, right? Everyone knows how things work. It's just you who can't explain it, and you have a sort of a weird understanding how things work in your mind, and it might be because there's a slight craziness in you, because you can't seem to see how things work, right? People know how things work. There are crazy people out there, of course, and then avoid them. But everyone knows how the mind works, or that's their. Even people who tell weird stories, or they ride a bicycle the way a bicycle should be rode. They drive a car the way a car should be rode. They go to the store and buy food as everybody else does, right? It's just when they can sit in this corner and make funny stories that actually bring them some sort of satisfaction or money or whatever it is, right? That's the manipulation part of language. But they know how things work. You don't see people driving the car across the field all of a sudden. All these crazy, so-called crazy people who reject reality and so on. No, they don't. They don't reject reality. They act as everybody else, even the most objectively founded truth-seeking philosophers in the world, right? It's just a kind of manipulation they use in certain situations to get some sort of, benefit or some result that they want.
Life. Is it the case that you spend a lot of time on one of these sort of 3 categories? True by definition. True but unverifiable. And false by self-contradiction. Do you spend how many how many hours do you pour into each bucket?
Without going into detail of my work, so yesterday we had this situation, and it spilled over into today, where I do software development as a job. You know, that we had a contradiction, and we had to fix it. We had to appeal to truth in order to fix it, because a contradiction would mean
we had to appeal to truth. We have a contradiction over here. I will appeal to truth. Oh, you appeal to truth. Where is truth? Can we appeal to it? Show me where it is so I can appeal to it. No, come on. If there's a contradiction between what you... It's not a contradiction if I say something is false and you saying something is true, if it's the same proposition that we're dealing with. It's not a contradiction that some persons say it's false and another says true, because it's based on their respective experiences. You can't go and say, well, you should be experiencing true, or the affirmation of this proposition should be true. There's something wrong with you, right? There might be something wrong with you, but you can't claim access to their mind, because that's a problem of other minds. So it doesn't matter in that, but I would say, okay, if I am very, very convinced that I am right, that this proposition is true, and that guy or girl claims it to be false, I would, draw back slowly and, retreat and stay away, right?
And then we don't get paid, essentially, down the road. That's what it directly leads into. So yes, I mean, that's very, very much an object lesson in a very real sense of this code doesn't work as expected. It worked in this situation, didn't work here. What's the difference? And we had to really work hard to figure out what that was and resolve it to make it consistent. I know it's not quite in the abstract category you're talking about, but that was real life what we had to deal with this past 2 days.
Well, no, I would say it is in the first category. So universals don't necessarily mean everywhere, all the time, across the entire planet, through like all dimensions. In the way that 2 and 2 make 4, but we don't sit there and say, okay, it works on my computer, it doesn't work on your computer. I remember one of the very first pieces of professional code I produced, I took to my boss.
Are we going into computer programming, software, and computer troubleshooting? Is that I know this must be a part of a larger discussion, and that excuses it a bit, but you have edited it to this format, so it's a bit, a computer program is not an object, right? It's a convention, it's a structure, it's a language, it's a method, right? You can either be conforming to it or you can't be conforming to it. If you're conforming to it, it should work, right? And if it doesn't work, it's likely because it's not conforming, whatever it is you're trying to establish, right? It's not an object, so it can't be experienced. It can't be true or false, right? It can be correct or incorrect according to that standard, right?
A tandem computer to figure out when they needed to upgrade, or a tandem operating system, COBOL 74. So I extracted all the data, I ran it through a database.
COBOL? Holy shit, that must be many. That's the 70s, right?
So I created a navigatable chart that you could sort of drill down and look at all. It was a cool piece of code, and it told them where all the storage was being used, because storage was crazy expensive on those systems back in the day. And I took my very proud piece of first professional code to my boss, and I tested it on a couple of people's machines, but he was one of these freaks who screwed around with his date settings. Like, you expect month, day, year, maybe a day, month, year, but he...
Oh, so when people don't conform automatically to your standards, then they are freaks? Okay, Mr. Triggered, there is a freak. It's not there are tons of different kind of formats for date and time. Just look in your, settings in your computer, or in Excel or something like that. And in Europe, there it's the day, the month, the year, and in the US it's the month, day, year, and that. But it doesn't say necessarily have to be some particular standard. It depends on, maybe if you are in America, want to sell the program in Europe, it should be different. Or if this guy had been in Europe and want to train himself to understand another format for, then who knows? I mean,
he was one of these guys who goes year, day, month. And I just hadn't written code to handle such a freaky way of displaying or working.
Oh, it's freaky. Your triggered subjective emotion is important to establish here. But why don't you keep that unverifiable, subjective, useless, unphilosophical aspects to yourself? Why do you have to spurt it here in the faces of all your nice listeners in a deeply philosophical discussion, right? Why are you this way? What's the matter with you?
With dates, right? So I had to convert them to a long integer and then reformulate them and all that kind of stuff. And I put a bunch of masks in for various forms of dates, and I remember.
Oh, so now you're dropping all these technical terms, so you can look like you are very deep. This is something you know something about, apparently, right? And you can drop these terms, so people say, "Wow, he must have been an incredible programmer." Oh, and this freak, yes, he must have been a freak because he didn't follow the same data format as Steph, the up-and-coming super programmer.
Coming, like, it didn't work on his computer, a particular function that relied on date parsing. And I came back and the other programmers in the room were just kind of laughing and said, "Did he get you on the date? Did he get you on the date?" And I said, "Hey, that's a Me Too thing, man." No, I said, "Yeah, he got me on the date." And he's like, "Yeah, he keeps his dates that way to figure out how detail oriented the programmers are." And it's like, yeah, that's a good lesson. And it was really important. So,
I get it. Well, that's smart. Yeah, you need to be observe how things run to be compatible with how things run. Well, that's not a bad idea.
Computers, it didn't work on someone who had some freaky flowing backwards through time way of working with dates. So by universal.
Oh, so you were emotionally triggered because he got you, right? You're just thinking, I have a preconceived idea about how things work. I have an objective claim in my head about dates, and I'm going to, extend it to my boss. And when I figure out that he got me, he tricked me, he's a freak. He's a freak. I wanted to be big programmer Steph, and he boo-hoo.
So that's kind of what I'm talking about. It doesn't mean that it's a universal principle like gravity. It means that there's universality involved. In other words, if you have a problem with your computer and you phone someone, you have a problem with that particular program, and I don't know if you've ever had this, and they say, "Well, it works at my end," and it's like, "Well, I'm not coming to your house to work it now, am I?" So the important thing is it doesn't work at my end, which is why everybody tries to remote dial into your computers to solve your issues and all that kind of stuff. So universal just means it's a universal principle. And so the code that you were working with has to work on the client side. It has to work on various machines. It has to work with different date settings. The more universal the code becomes, the better. And of course,
there's still about half an hour left of this. I'm not sure. It depends on how much computer stuff he's going to, dilute this truth discussion with. I might stop earlier, but let's see how it goes.
Of course, a lot of programming is relying on layers. I'm thinking sort of like Unity for video game programming, SQL for database querying, and there are application frameworks or SDKs that allow you to build apps that work on iOS.
Oh, he's name dropping and term dropping, and he must be such a great programmer. Wow, this is something he knows something about. He doesn't know much about philosophy, but maybe it's because you're just stating computer programming, right? It's just an aside. It's just something that occurred to me. right now. I don't know why I haven't thought of that before now. But didn't he used to have a blue logo? Well, I'm certain. I feel confident in my memory of his older logos. Maybe I can find videos where this logo is still attached. It surely is. With a blue logo, with a person like an adult in the middle, and then embracing three other sort of stylized persons. This sort of roundish sort of community, protective family sort of logo. And now he's using this mountain with the top and the pinnacle, like the one. Things are, it's not a flat structure where embracing each other and supporting and so on. Now it's about the pinnacle, the pyramid, where he has the glory on top. The sun is rising, like these old Marxist posters, and the communist day is dawning in the east and whatever. And he's sitting there on the top of the pyramid, like, the all-seeing eye. Free domain. But it seems like a cult leader, right? I'm sitting at the top of the mountain looking down on you, little people. I have the big sun glory around me. I'm looking at you from the top of the, objective mountain. And all you little echoes, all you little, edge case lords down there, don't try to climb my mountain. I'm sitting up here. I'm protected by all my attack monkeys.
On Android, I don't think that they double up with Windows as well, or triple up with Windows as well, but they're trying to make things more universal so that they'll work in every environment. And I think that's the level of universality that I would be thinking of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, that very much, it worked in our local test environment, and it did not work in our staging environment. And that's pretty much exactly what it was. And it turned out it wasn't even the program itself. We had to dig in to basically a proxy that basically took the request from the outside world and handed it off to the inside apps. And the translation was incorrect in staging. So that's effective. We didn't catch that until we had to dig at it for a while. So yeah. So yeah, totally.
I also remember back in the day writing a program that produced reports, testing it on, because, again, I had the date example from the very beginning of my career, testing on a wide variety of machines, wide variety of servers, and it all worked. Until we installed it, and then they said it didn't work, a DLL call. And it turns out that every single time I had tested it, I had been logged into the server. And what they did was they left the server with nobody logged in. So nobody was logged into the server, and that was the issue. And of course, I was like, well, you could just leave someone logged into the server. It's like, that's a big security issue. So I had to change things up quite a bit to make things work on a server that it never occurred to me, of course, because whenever you test things, you've got to log in to test it, right? So it had never crossed my mind to have a call across the network to a server where nobody was logged in, because you log in to test, right? So yeah, so mine failed the test of universality. And I guess yours also failed the test of universality, because the whole point of designing things is to have them work everywhere. There's no point really designing things to just work on one computer or your computer or this particular type of computer in this particular type of environment. You want to make it as universal as possible. That's the whole Java thing, right? Like write once, run everywhere. So I think certainly for those of us who are dealing in objective reality and reproducibility and universality, I think we do want things to work everywhere, and that is kind of the requirement. And when it fails to do that, we have failed the test of universality. And I think that's sort of first question of, does it work?
So now a discussion about universality and truth has come down to writing a program that works on a number of computers. That's not good enough for me. I can't, rest on that.
So, is there anyone else who sort of floats around these particular areas? Because I can certainly think of professions where you're dealing in much more subjective states.
I do a lot of work on like entrepreneurship and business strategies. And so much of my job is listening to entrepreneurs give a hypothesis about what they think about the market or their product or whatever, and then telling them or explaining to them that they have no way to prove that's true, and they have to go out and actually get the data.
No, but no, you can only establish truth in the now, right? You can only establish something to be true in the now. You can establish truth in the future, but if you're going to make some business, start a business, you have to have some idea of how things might function in the future. That doesn't mean you know it's going to be true, but you have to have an understanding that how things might turn over in a number of things you can sell, or it has to have this sort of quality, or it has to be on this place at this time by these people, and you have to make some sort of future planning to establish a business. Otherwise, you're just farting in the wind, right? But it can't be true. You can verify it later by finding out whether or not things are the case, or that something is true, if truth applies to that you're talking about. But if you're focused on in a business plan saying, I'm going to corner the market on this, then that is an incentive, but the incentive doesn't drive the market, not your incentive as the business owner. It's an appeal to customers' incentive, or maybe even creating an incentive in them, right? So you can't say, I'm going to play this golf course and I'm doing it in 100 strokes, right? You can't plan the result ahead. You can plan it stepwise towards that goal, but you will only find out at that point in time whether or not you have reached that goal. The point is, what are you doing now and in the near future to get toward that goal? And if somebody comes and say, I'm going to make this to get this result, that's just wishful thinking. I would completely agree about that. But for it to be true, this is a different matter. Then you have to be at that point in time where you are claiming that truth.
And look at the customer behavior to turn it into something that's actually like verifiable.
Right. I remember reading about this and then ending up talking about it when I was in China many years ago to do business, and people were like, well, you know, the Chinese market is this big, and if we could just get 1% of that market, this translates into X amount of dollars, which would...
Yeah, but that's an old trick, right? Just 1%, the 1% business model. It's always bullshit, right? These are those who want, the quick buck types, right? I'm just going to make, dog food and canned dog food, and then I get only 1%. And that means I will be a multimillionaire, right? It will be a multi-million business. Well, it is actually the first % of the market that is the most difficult, because that's where you have to establish everything. The next % is much easier, right? The first % is when you grab a part of the market, an already established market. Unless you can grow the market by your new fantastic product, it's the same market where you are going to take a slice of that market and push somebody else away from it, right? Or at least to some extent push back on some other producer. That 1% is the most difficult to take, because that's when you arrive on the market and have to prove yourself, right? So people saying, just 1%, you can't trust them. I would say, I wouldn't trust anyone saying, we just need to can some dog food and then we'll take 1% and then we'll be millionaires. No. They have no vision. They have no understanding of how to get into the market, I would say. Maybe they have, if they have a very, very good business plan of how to get to that 1%, it might be viable, right? But usually that's the easy trick. It sounds like just 1%, just 1%. That might be 10 million cans of dog food a month, right? To corner 1% of the global market or the internal market. So
it was usually a pretty large sum of money. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's sort of like saying, a lot of computers get sold every year, man. If we could just get 1% of those sales, we'd make a lot of money. And it's like, but I mean, especially if you're doing something different. So, Windows and Apple, they've got like 99% of the, but if we introduce another computer and just get 1% of that, it's like, yeah, but introducing a whole new operating system and so on, and getting people to adopt it, it's pretty rough, man. Pretty tough.
Absolutely.
And so there's that 1% wish list, right? Where people are like, if we could just do this, it's like, yeah, but how do you get there? What are the objective measures? And I remember, not to say anything positive about Bill Gates, who I know is kind of on the outs these days, but when he first left Microsoft and went into the charity business, there was, tons of money being spent and lots of PowerPoints and business plans. And I think it was being delivered to Africa. And he's like, okay, well, how many nets have been delivered over the last year? It's sort of this long. It's like, but we got a statement of values, abstract PowerPoint about corporate values. And it's like, well, that's all well and good, I suppose. But, quick question again, how many have you actually delivered? And they couldn't tell them. It's like, well, you can't manage what you can't.
Cash flow is king.
First thing we need to do is get some metrics in place to know whether we're doing better or worse, and so on. And so, yeah, that definitely is a way of saying, as the old thing in business, a wish is not a strategy, a hope is not a business plan. Crossing your fingers and spreadsheets are not real life. Potential sales, potential profits, if, and they're fine. You got to do that because you got to measure against it, but they're not the same as actual profits, money in the bank, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and I think like in one of your little tech rants before a call-in, like a couple weeks ago, you were talking about actually make it so that the customer can use it. And the question that always comes up with these entrepreneurs is, it's like, okay, we can make this thing that fixes this problem for these people. And it's like, great. How many of them have you actually talked to? And then there's this long, awkward silence.
Right. Or how many, there's other questions. How many people have that problem? And what is the estimated economic value of solving it? So all of that is a potential. There's only a potential market. Let's say people find it $10 worth of value. You can sell them something for $5. Okay. But you're competing with every other $5 that they could spend. They've got to be informed. They've got to understand. You've got to motivate them to act, to actually buy. So translating things from theory to practice is pretty.
It's interesting talk, but it's not really about truth. I'm going to fast forward a bit here, see what they're talking about.
Projected sales into real sales. Yeah. That's against it. And you see this in dating all the time. Some guy gets infatuated with a girl and none of his friends can say anything bad about her. Otherwise, they're being disloyal. They're not allowing him to be happy. They're mindlessly critical. They're jealous because she's such a great girl and all that. And so, he's got a plan called, I'm going to have a wonderful relationship, but he denies any feedback. Who resist that kind of examination, listening in, who are dealing with more subjective stuff in marketing, sales, psychology, that kind of stuff. Because if not, while you sort of gather your thoughts on that, there's a whole interesting series of areas of professions that don't deal with truth. And in fact, the business model only exists because there's not a rigorous or even remotely strict question of truth and falsehood or application of universal principles. I'm thinking of things like tarot card readers and pet psychics and, mediums who claim to be able to communicate with.
But all these people appeal to people wanting to imagine things that are more interesting than the boring real life, right? They appeal to astrology that gives them answers that might be circumventing. They know how things work. They go to the toilet, they brush their teeth, they ride the bicycle, they walk up the stairs, they don't try to jump out of buildings. These people know how things work. They're just trying to manipulate other people into, taking advantage of them in some way, right? Maybe you should have an insight into that also.
With the dead and so on, all of that kind of stuff is, it's in the realm of because the question of ghosts, right? The question of ghosts and psychic phenomenon and so on. There's life without mass. There's life without any physical characteristics. And that is a contradiction because it isn't in any practical sense. And you saw a lot of the stuff in the money raising for Trump. And, we're going to take these law cases and we're going to get this election challenged and we're going to get these, what they call fraudulent results overturned and so on. It's like, I don't really think, there was much of a path there because I understand that we are now in the time of political aggression, political violence. And, if there's some judge that is going to hold the presidency and trillions of dollars in his hands, that judge is going to be subject to a huge amount of unholy pressure. And so the idea that, but we've got proof, if they say, it's like, well, proof doesn't matter because proof is not physics, right? Proof still relies on the frailty of human motivation. And
so, Steph, you were asking about professions that are less in the objective world and maybe have to deal with a little bit more of subjectivity. And I don't know if this qualifies. Let me know if this helps. But I just quit my job as a poker dealer, which I had been doing for roughly a decade. So is that something that would qualify to you?
Well, I don't think so because the rules of poker are objective, right?
No, they're not, because they're not an object. It's a rule, right? An elephant is not a rule. A rule is not an elephant or the same kind as an elephant. An elephant is an object. A rule is a thought of system in your head that objects you use to perform that rule with can be considered objective is another thing, but they're just used to conform to the rule. The rule is not an object. It can't be objective. You can only say you are conforming to the rule or you are not conforming to the rule, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, of course, there's the gray areas, but in general, they're pretty objective.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if somebody gets a full house or whatever, it doesn't beat, a 2 and a 9, a 7 and a whatever, right? So, I mean, there's bluffing for sure, but bluffing is certainly part of the game, right? So I would say that that's a pretty objective discipline. Objective doesn't mean
pretty objective
to the nth.
So now there's pretty objective and largely subjective and largely objective and pretty. Why all these sort of additional conditions to subjective and objective? So you're making things float around in uncertainty or on undetermined waters, right?
To degree, because human beings are not physics, right? Physics does have to mean predictable largely to the nth degree. I mean, I don't think we would say that meteorology is...
Predictability is not truth. Okay, you need to understand this. If you're inferring, right, you are inferring something with science that says, okay, I have experienced this in the past, I'm still experiencing in the now, that when I jump from this tower, right, I am, hitting the floor down there, right? I'm inferring that into the future, but you are not experiencing the future yet. That's why you call it the future. So you can't attach truth to something that is an inference, right? You have to be in that point in time in the future when that becomes now in order to establish truth, right? It's a discussion about truth, I presume still, right?
The same as atomic physics in terms of predictability, but there certainly are principles that are generally the case. You can't predict weather down to the nth degree, but you can predict the general patterns in the same way that, if you know gender and ethnicity, you can predict voting patterns to a large degree, but not down to, a level of atomic certainty. So, sure. But yeah, so you don't know if someone's bluffing for sure or not, or you probably don't. But given that that's part of the game and it's an objective rule in the game, that you're allowed to bluff, and in fact you're encouraged to bluff, I think, a lot of times, and that the rules themselves are objective. I mean, people wouldn't play the game if it was purely subjective. In other words, if you could just make up whatever rule you wanted. Bursting out of entirely contradiction.
Before I fast forward, no, that's not subjectivity. That you're making up a rule as you go. That is not subjectivity. Subjectivity is that you are the only one in having that experience of that. No, subjectivity is when you experience an elephant, you are having a subjective experience of that elephant. It might be something else that's an object. Now I'm just using elephant because they're sort of a very distinct object, right? So when you experience elephant, you are having a subjective experience of elephant. But the reason it's called subjective is that it's possible to make it objective, not the elephant, but the understanding of the agreement upon what we are dealing with, right? If there's another person who also claims to be experiencing an elephant, you have sort of established an objective understanding of that elephant. You have a richer insight into elephant, which if you trust that person, right? It's also in that sense, it's based in some degree about trust, right? But if you need to find somebody to work with, at some point you need to understand whether or not you have to have an insight into how people work and reject those who tend to, reject those things as false, which you really consider true. But the subjective, it's all the experiences are subjective as a basis, right? All experience is subjective. It's only the agreement about what you are subjectively experiencing that can be objective if you agree upon a proposition made about that object. Okay, I think I've beaten that horse to death now.
Victory stuff. I think that's quite important. When it comes to sort of code review, then I think that's important. If your code requires more memory than physically would be present in most computers that you'd be running on, that's kind of important, because then if you need 12 gigs but only 8 gigs is your average computer, then you have a contradiction there in that the code can't really run. If you require and you say, well, I do have an endless loop here, but if we'll just use a really fast processor, doesn't really break you out of the cycle. Having a faster processor, an endless loop is an endless loop no matter what, right? So if you're asking for an endless loop to be broken out through speed, then that's another kind of contradiction. And there's a lot of that goes into code review, I think. And I remember, back in the day, using a tree control for a program that one particular version of Visual Basic installed its own tree control that conflicted. And so if my control worked, then Visual Basic didn't work. If the Visual Basic tree control worked, then mine didn't work. And we basically had to go an entire different route to reprogram the tree control. And so there was a contradiction.
You're name dropping computer specific terms without explaining them, and that is a trait of someone who wants to sound as if they're very knowledgeable and sort of talking down to people in an indirect fashion by sounding like they're very knowledgeable. I know they're discussing computers, but 90% of the listeners don't know what those trees are, right? Or the other terms you're using. So you're sort of duping them of what the term is by sounding like you have deep knowledge of something without explaining to people. Well, it would be a nice trait if you would explain what you're talking about so people can follow your thinking, right?
People wanted both to work, but if only one could work, that was bad. And so I think there is, certainly in coding and in engineering and science, there's a lot of ferreting out of inconsistencies and contradictions. And that's an attempt, of course, to make sure that you're as firmly established in the first category as you possibly can before investing more. And that's the same thing with hammering business plans, right? If you have a path to get 1% of this particular big market, and you have some proven ability to do so, and you've already made inroads, and you've got a value proposition that's irresistible, and you've got your competitive analysis, and you're coming out ahead in many categories, then you have a possibility. Now, of course, you can say, well, you have a possibility if you have none of those things, but in a very practical sense, in a very real sense, you don't. I mean, it's sort of like saying, well, I'm going to put up a random keystroke generator, and through that, I'm going to generate brilliant code. And it's like, okay, is that technically possible? Yeah, in the same way that you could have a random typist, a random typing program that would also produce wonderful poetry, and but it's not practical in any sort of time or predictability sense. And have you had any encounters with the rank subjectivity fields or
The rank.
endeavors?
Oh, this subject.
The only
Ooh,
thing I can think of is
he really does hate any idea of subjectivity, right? I mean, it's like he thinks it's a scourge on humanity that there is such a thing as subjective understanding, while the real understanding of how things work is that all your experience is subjective from the start, right? And if you want to get to objectivity, you need at least another person to agree upon that object with, right? There's no way to check if other people are experiencing the same thing as you. That's why we have the idea of objectivity, because we need to find some way, at least sufficiently good, to establish a kind of common understanding of this experience. There is no intrinsically objective universe anywhere. That's a mind fart of yours, right? It doesn't exist. It's not there, right? And the sooner you stop fetishizing this objectivity, and also I might mention that and I'm not sure if you're going to enlighten us on this topic, but certainty should be considered a kind of knowledge, right? And truth is a way to establish, let's say, objective knowledge. Then what is certainty, right? I mean, one of the biggest problems about human beings is the idea of certainty. I mean, and I'm not trying to, draw any parallels or anything. Don't misquote me on this. But Adolf Hitler, he was certain about killing the Jews, right? Because he was certain, nobody could argue with him. Nobody could steer him away from this crazy idea, right? Because he was certain, right? Certainty is, if you look around and things, the way they work is because people believe they have certainty. And certainty rules out any possibility of arguing about it because you're certain. There's no reason to listen to other people's weird objective understanding of the world when you're certain. The problem in the world is really certainty. I would suggest very strongly that you look into this and start to think about it, okay?
As an example of subjectivity from the tech world is in the code review, and this was prompted because you mentioned code reviews, and this is sort of resolved not through any, I think, objective, but sort of like an agreement. So like style, coding style. Do you want to use tabs or spaces? How far of an indent do you want? How long should your lines be? That kind of stuff. That stuff is usually not, there's nothing really objective about any of that, except possibly code maintenance. But for the most part, the subjectivity there is you say, well, it looks good enough to me, or I like.
No, but it's because everything is subjective, right? And because there are some parts where you can't reach objectivity, doesn't mean that those parts where you have subjectivity only, right? That subjectivity that can't reach objectivity is bad somehow. No, those are equally important, right? So
the way this looks, and we sort of come to an agreement on what that is, but there's no real, that's not, I don't know if that's quite what you're getting at, but that's like the only thing that's subjective about not the only thing that's subjective. One of the things subjective about.
Is Stefan now coming in to, save the day and objectify everything? So, we got rid of this objectivity. Oh my God. All these echoes, they will come running. If there's any subjectivity around, they will come running and destroy my business plan, right?
About the work I do on the technical side.
No, I think that's interesting as well, right? So for those of you who don't know, your do loops, your if-then, your for whiles and your do loops and all of that, you tend to have these indented. The if-then statements tend to be indented so that it's easier to read rather than a sort of just a left-hand wall of text. And yeah, some people use spaces, some people use tabs. The civilized ones use tabs, and the spaces are for the insane barbarians. But if you have a code,
I don't know.
if you have a code shop, whatever.
Okay. So now there are subjective opinions about the conventions of how programs are, and there are these weird people who use spaces, and I'm using tabs because that's okay. That's more structured. That's better. That's my subjective opinion, and I want to make that objective. No, what you would do if you were a good programmer, right? It's obvious, right? What would you do if you're a great programmer in that particular, it might not even be in the same language, right? If it's a text file, you're not using some specific application to create your code, you would create a program that did it automatically. And you would sort of talk to the other people about their subjective experience about how this program should be put together. You could also make a program version that used space, and you can use another program that used tabs. You can use another program that used something third or fourth, and you could even build it into the program and say, do you want this kind of indent? Do you want this kind of that? You would, of course, make a program that did it for you, right? Just type away and then put it through the program. And even if the program said there's something wrong here, you would also catch some errors maybe, right? Why would you sit there using tab or space and just run it through a program and then it spit out the text formatted for you?
And it should just be applied to, because everybody's just used to that, and it's just an efficiency standard. If it's kind of mixed, then you don't know when you're going into code review. So one of the ways that tabs are efficient is if you want to get over to the code, you just push if it's like, I don't know, if you got a tab of 5 each and it's 25 characters in, you only have to push 5 times to get there. But if it's spaces, you kind of have to hold it down for 25 times or 25 repetition, right? So whatever you have as a standard, it's kind of like
this
railway
is totally
tracks.
old
Like,
school,
what is the
right?
objectively right standard for railway tracks? Well, kind of what's being used.
It has been at
or
least
is it
it has been at least 15 years since he were programming anything. I mean, I would suggest it's been 20 years since I was in programming, right? Or any kind of something that looked like programming. I don't know anything about how things work now, right? I have no touch with the programming. And you're talking about it like, COBOL and so. It's from the Stone Ages, man, right? Why do you want to sound like you know a thing about programming? You haven't probably done it in 15, 20 years.
Is it objectively right or wrong to have the driver's side of the car on the left or the right? Kind of depends where you're driving, and depends which side of the road people drive on, so your blind spot is not too bad. So there is not an objectively right answer, but there is subjective tradition and preference that you really have to take into account. And I think the same thing would be true of the sort of tab space controversy, or do you indate 2 or 4? It also depends how many nested loops you have. If you have, I don't know, 20 or 30 nested.
It's not necessarily, that may be appropriate in some circumstances, but just generally speaking, in order to use and maintain that code in the future,
it's on an entirely new platform.
I'm trying to skip ahead from this computer.
Important. Yeah, you could make a house that would last for 1,000 years. How
would you know? How would you know it's lasting 1,000 years? You don't until that, the end of that 1,000th year, that it's still standing there in a way that would be considered standing. So ridiculous.
It's very rare that anybody would want. Once you get the state involved, once you get coercion of the timestamps and all of that. So that.
I'm just skipping ahead to see if there's more about direct philosophical discussion about truth. So let's see.
The injustice of national debts. I just saw this in an article today that they're still saying that Trump told people governments get 250 million people killed just in the 20s. Around where the votes came from, and is really interesting. Value to what end?
Oh, so now discussion of value. I think I will drop the value discussion and just let it be about this truth. There's only a couple of minutes left. I don't think that could be a thorough discussion of value in a philosophical sense. So I'll just leave it here. So thank you for listening in. 1 hour and 45 minutes about truth. that was a lot of listening, and I guess if you are on YouTube and want to listen to some Stefan Molyneux also, even though you should be listening to me, of course, right? you are getting some Steph voice here on YouTube via my channel. So let's just say that we'll see each other next time.